morning, Mike. How are you this morning? Thank you for that rousing. Welcome, everyone. Very glad to have everyone here this morning for the next Focus Forum. This one on diversity, equity, and inclusion work in schools. Just a few quick announcements this morning. First of all, I want to thank our sponsor, the Incarnate Word Foundation, for providing the funding and support for these community forums. We very much appreciate that. And I will also talk at the end of the forum a little bit about other events we have coming up soon. And finally, I want to make the point that if you like what you're hearing here today and you want to stay more up to date with everything that Focus is doing and be a part of all the events Focus is putting on, you can become a member of Focus at the Focus STL website. So definitely think about that. All right, and with that, I am going to waste no more time that we have this morning and introduce our moderator. Dr. Karen Hall is a double Focus alum as well as a Focus board member, and we are incredibly proud and happy to have her here this morning. She is also the regional supervisor for the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and an education professor. So welcome, Karen, and I will hand it over to you and get out of your way.
Thank you, Wally. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to introduce this esteemed group of strong, courageous women here in the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So panelists, could you please turn on your videos? Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. So before we get started, I do want to introduce my lovely guests here. We have Dr. Shonda Ambers-Phillips. She is an alum of Focus in LSL 2022. She currently is the Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Kirkwood School District. Welcome. And next, we have Dr. Sharonica Hardin-Bartley, and she is also a recent graduate from Leadership St. Louis 2022, and she is the Superintendent, University City School District. So welcome. And next, so happy to hear Brittany Hogan. She is with us. She is the former Director of Educational Equity and Diversity in the Rockwood School District. And I am so honored to have her here. I'm so excited. This is a new friend. I'm a new fan. All right, now she's able to join us this morning. And next, my dear colleague, we have Dr. Jamie Wellborn. She is the president of the Midwest Collaborative for Cultural Proficiency in Schools and assistant professor, St. Louis University School of Education. Welcome, Jamie. So, like I said before, these are esteemed guests, and I also like to consider them as leaders. And leaders is not only about a title, but it's about how you inspire others and how you step forward and you lean into challenging situations. And this that we're going to discuss is the work that we have going on in our communities that can be rather contentious, but this work is necessary. And these lovely guests here, which actually I would like to say courageous, authentic, and trailblazing here in our region, they're going to share the work that they're doing and some things that we can tell us, like what can we do around the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So starting off, I think this question is really important. I use this question around the why. I use this with my students at St. Louis University. I use this when I mentor, when I'm consulting. I think it's important whenever someone is doing this work in education, especially around this work, you need to get clear about why you are taking this path, because the path will not always be a pleasant one. It can be challenging. And so you need to be grounded. So my guests today, help us, tell us about your journey and your why, so we all can glean and understand your journey and be encouraged by what you all have decided and what you are doing today. So let's start with Sharonica. Can you tell us about your why? I heard her why last week and I really loved her why. us off. So can you tell us why are you doing this work? How did you get into this position today?
Good morning again. Thank you, Karen. It's great to be with you and great to be with the other panelists. I am a St. Louisan, raised and born and educated right here in St. Louis. I have been a product of several school systems, parochial school systems in St. Louis City, North St. Louis City, and DeVille. Moved on to Rockwood School District as a DSEG student. Also matriculated through an HBCU right here, Harris Stowe, St. Louis University. So I've had some unique experiences. And one of the common elements throughout all of those experiences is that I've had amazing human beings who poured into me, who believed in me, and who saw the tremendous amount of potential that this little Black girl from North St. Louis possessed. And that's my why. My why is making sure that I am pouring in to other brown girls, other brown boys, other students, other children who may be marginalized, who may be oppressed, and who may or may not know their full potential. My why is centered around ensuring that I am doing what is absolutely best for them.
Wow, so inspiring. Thank you so much, Sharonica. So Brittany, can you share with us your why?
Karen, as soon as you were asking that question, the first thing that popped into my mind, if not me, then who? So I'm also a graduate of HBCU. I graduated from Hampton University. I've been in St. Louis since 2007 when I came here to attend Washington University to get my master's in social work. And I had no idea that it was going to lead to me being in education. I always say I can never tell this story about how I got here without talking about Terry Harris. So I met Terry and I immediately was like, I want to know what Terry Harris knows and I want to do what he does. And I came to Rockwood to work for Terry. I walked around and I said that for almost 2 years. I have no idea, probably got on his nerves, but I knew that I wanted to do that work and I wanted to be a leader in equity and inclusion because I know what it's like to be a little Black girl in a space where you don't see a lot of reflections of yourself. And so if I say that I love the kids, then I have to show up for them in a way that creates meaningful impact for them to see themselves. And in my journey now, while it's been very difficult, it's allowed me to do this work in a broader sense, to do this work and talk across the country. And so now my platform is changing a little bit, but the work has always been rooted in the kids that I have served in Rockwood, the students who participate in the desegregation program in Rockwood.
Wonderful. That's, I'm impressed by that. And like I said, inspired, but I see some commonalities. And there was someone that saw something in you. And I want to now pivot to Jamie because I heard a name that I heard her why, and she shared to where she is today. Jamie, can you tell us your story and your why?
Yeah, absolutely. And if Terry Harris is on here, he needs to shout out there in the chat because I'm going to name drop too. So just a little bit of context before I tell that quick story, and I'll try to make it quick. Just context wise, like I didn't know my why when I was a little girl, but as I look back on my lived experiences, like I really feel like it was being honed in me from the very beginning. When I think about the rural homogenous community that I lived in, and then when I decided to become a teacher and I moved to Belleville, Illinois and started teaching and experienced education in a different way than I had. Then I reverted back, went to the riverbanks of Kentucky and taught in this very rural farm community, 14, 15 kids in a class, and then back up here to St. Louis, moved across the river and was administrator in Rockwood. My why really started to develop as I noticed the differing levels of education and the outputs of the systems, across just this small, Illinois, Missouri area. And so that's what really started to drive my passion around this work. So let me jump right into the story. I was working as an assistant principal at Baldwin Elementary in the Rockwood School District. And we were really working on response to intervention at that time. Well, I just happened to be preparing to write my dissertation proposal. And I wanted to investigate something related to equitable outcomes as a result of the response to intervention programs. So, I designed this wonderful 90-page study, worked all the way through one semester. And at the end of that semester, my advisor, and she knows that I tell this story in this way, told me she wouldn't let me do this particular study. And so all I could see myself is, one, I'm not going to finish this PhD. I've just wasted a semester. I can't investigate something that I'm really, truly passionate about. Someone's kind of putting up a barrier for me. And so the advisor told me, quit your job, come work for as a GA with me. And so I'm like, yeah, right, I can't do that. I called Terry Harris just crying, bawling that like I've messed up, like I don't know what I'm going to do. So I ended up quitting my job. I took a sabbatical. Anyway, Terry showed up the very next day because I told him the story of they're not going to let me do this particular study, with a whole bag of books for me. But he pulled one particular out of the bag and he said, I need you to read this tonight. And it was Culturally Proficient Education. And it was the one that's a context on poverty. It actually has an orange cover. There's so many cultural proficiency books out there. And so I don't read typically books in one night, but I went home and I swear I highlighted everything in there. And it's at that moment that I realized my real purpose, even as an educator. And I began to reflect back on those experiences as a child in education, going to a university, then becoming a teacher, and the experiences I was having and the impact I had and still had to give for the students that would be in front of me. Even today, I think about that at the university level. So I would say, Terry, so instrumental. Brittany and Sharonica, you both said those people that come into your life, they're there for a reason. And so if I were to say, what's my why? Of course, I'm going to say the students, but I've been given this platform somehow to be able to lead adults and impact adults that ultimately serve that why is for all of our children, especially those that have been historically marginalized and underserved.
Thank you, Jamie. And again, I love the connections and the themes that are coming out of this conversation. And I hope all of our guests, you all are taking notes down and how this has developed for our wonderful group of people here. So last but not least, Shonda, please tell us your why and your journey.
Thank you. I have to start off by just shouting out my HBCU, Alabama. There's no way I'm not going to make and recognize the foundation really for my academic success. And so my why, I'm just thinking about this. For me, students are always at the center. I knew I wanted to work with students, and I'm not really sure which perspective I wanted to take as a teacher or a counselor, but I knew connection for kids. Someone certainly poured into my life, and I felt very responsible and accountable to pay that forward. And so for me, when I think back personally and professionally, diversity, equity, inclusion is just a part of who I am. It's not a hat that I can take off. It's just really something that shows up in everything that I do. I think about as a parent of a Black son, how it shows up. I think about as an administrator and an educator, how it shows up not only in working with the students and the staff members and the families, but also just really trying to view all of the decisions that come across my desk through the lens of equity. I think about starting off in education as a teacher and feeling very responsible and compelled to teach an inclusive curriculum, even though my textbook did not include the experiences of everyone. I felt like as a counselor, it meant that I needed to create these safe and affirming spaces for all of my students and humanize them and make sure that they knew that they could show up as their authentic self and model that in my very being and existence. And then again, as an administrator, just looking at those decisions and thinking about things in terms of how they could impact our students in a larger sense. And so I feel like in terms of my story, students are always a part of my story, and they will always be my why. And I often say, like, education is not a field that you can just like wing it. Like, you have to become passionate about it. You have to really care about kids. And it's something that is deeply personal for me. So.
Thank you, Shonda. Thank you all. I think that in itself is just golden for us to hear where you're coming from. And so we're going to segue into really, how then do you use your lens, your social, cultural, and racial identity? How do you present in your spaces when you try and do this work? You put kids in the center. How does this then manifest itself? How does this become programming from your different perspectives? So you all were handpicked specifically because you're not all the same. And I think that is very important when we think about this work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I want to go to you, Brittany, because I loved in your introduction, like I had no idea I was going to be in education. And then you've also pivoted out of it. But I still want to know, like, from your lens and your experience when you've been in education and kind of how you're transitioning out, like, what have you done? What have you seen and the impact of it on students?
Yeah. So I think that once you're an educator, you're always an educator. And so I think I'm taking a break from the traditional education perspective at the moment, but I'm still very much involved. I'm still very much in the ring. I'm still part of this fight. So it just looks a little differently for me now. I think about all the things that I didn't feel like I saw when I was younger. I think about the first time I read a book that I really felt like I saw myself, and that was The Color Purple. And I was in high school, and that's a lot of time to not feel like you're truly engaged as a reader. And so for me, literature has always been the source of having a new experience and creating these windows, mirrors, and sliding door moments. Sliding doors when you can walk into the story and create this empathetic lens. Mirrors where people can see reflections of themselves, and windows when they can see reflections of the world. And so for me, a lot of my work centered around literature and ensuring that kids were seeing themselves in the books that were in front of them. We know that research shows that in third grade, if we don't capture a reader, that they're less likely to graduate from high school on time. They're less likely to get a vocational skill or go to a 4-year or 2-year university or college. And so for me, it was always, how can I capture that reader? How can I give children the ability to see themselves? Because it's just like taking a group selfie. If we took a group selfie right now of everyone on this call, the first thing you're going to do when that selfie pops up is look for yourself. And when you can't find yourself, you become a little disinterested. And school is the exact same way. Like, if we can't give children the ability to see themselves in what happens in our classrooms, and even broader, what happens in our educational spaces. Do they see themselves in the art on the wall? Do they see themselves in the people who are educating them? And then do they get to see the world, the other identities that exist? And so that's always been my call to task, is how do I create this experience that allows us to create these global citizens? And global citizens know how to interact with people who look like them, with people who look differently than them, with people who have different opinions than them. And so that has always been the work for me. And for me, the work has always been rooted in love and empathy, because what we know is that creating the ability to be empathetic, to be able to see something from someone else's perspective is so strong. And it's also one of the major skill sets that people are looking for in the workforce. So if we're creating these kids who are going to go out and be these future leaders, they need empathy. And how we do that, for me, has always been through books.
Oh, thank you. I love that. I love the voice, finding value in everyone's voice and developing themselves and feeling validated. So thank you for sharing that. So now going, excuse me, from Brittany's work from K-12, I'm going to pivot over to Jamie, and you're in the higher ed space and ed leadership at St. Louis University, and you're working with aspiring leaders. So how does this perspective of DEI present itself with adults and really important roles in having an impact, with educators right now? So what is your work?
Yeah, so a couple of things Brittany said made me just kind of link in and connect the work that I do, both in K-12 and higher ed. And I'll talk about that from a couple of different lenses. So I work predominantly with the culture proficiency framework. There are so many great frameworks that are out there, and I truly believe that it's not one over another. We really have to bring all of this work. Sharonica said it at the very beginning, that like it takes all of us to do this work. And so the culture proficiency framework really is a systemic level. When you look across a district or you look across a school, the culture proficiency framework allows you, as Brittany was talking about some of these, to look at our policies, our practices, the things that are, you know, on our walls, what our resources look like that we're putting in front of children. And so the work that I do specifically when I talk about systemic level is in all, we call them strategic transformative levers. So curriculum, instruction, assessment, the resources that are, you know, supported there, the programs that we offer, yeah, even including like sports and music programs. When you think about strategic planning, you think about finance, you think about hiring practices. The culture proficiency framework can be embedded by using these 4 tools, which I will go into if it gets to that point today, but I don't want to dominate the conversation in any way. But educators,
passionate. I appreciate it.
I know, sorry.
No worries.
Cut me off. Educators can use those tools to examine, I would say surface, examine, and change when necessary, those policies, practices, and behaviors. That's another piece of that culture proficiency framework, is building the capacity of educators or adults to adopt a mindset that allows them to be efficient and I would say effective in cross-cultural communication. And I know, Brittany, you mentioned that too. So I was kind of linking in with that, in the efforts of opening doors for all of our students, especially those who are not thriving in our school system. So like I say, whether we're at the higher education, like our School of Education we are using the tools to really look at our policies, practices, and even individual behaviors. While I'm, you know, teaching in my courses, we also use those tools to examine curriculum and the resources to support that implementation. I think it's really important, and I've reflected on this a lot this year in one of the classes that I'm teaching to prepare principals. When they leave our institution, it's important that they have a framework, whether it's the culture proficiency framework or whether it's some other lens or tools to do this work. It's important that they know how to do it. That's something that we want them to leave with, and have that mindset where no matter what space they land in, they can be effective as a leader and make sure that they're opening doors for those students, and I would say staff members that are working in their buildings and districts.
Yeah, that's so important. Thank you so much, Jamie. And so, Shonda, moving into now a formal leadership role in a school district, what does the programming look like for you in Kirkwood? How are you facilitating this work?
So right now, equity is a part of our strategic plan. So it really is foundational in terms of the work that we are doing in Kirkwood. We have a long history of doing diversity and supporting and being involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but it is really intentional and explicitly stated in our strategic plan. So again, there are 4 areas, and one of those areas is DEI, and there are really 3 components under that area. So one is, as Jamie said, looking at auditing our policies, practices, and procedures. We talk about equitable outcomes for kids, but we know in order for us to have equitable outcomes, we have to have equitable systems in place, right? So really looking at who's disproportionately impacted by our policies, practices, and procedures, and who's benefiting from it. And really trying to analyze the why behind that. And so that's that one strand of that. The second piece is just really looking at staffing, ensuring that we have diverse staff in place for our students. We did a PD the other day and just really talking about, in the state of Missouri, about 90% of the educators are white. And so as Brittany said, students need to be able to see windows and mirrors. They need to be able to understand their perspective and the perspective of others. And that really does start by that representation. It matters. Kids can't really aspire to be things that they don't necessarily see. And so a lot of conversation really is had in my district, because it is a predominantly white district, about what value does that hold for white students. We know that having a diverse staff is good for our Black students, and the research certainly supports that. in terms of not only graduating from high school, but matriculating on to higher education, but it's great for our white students as well. And I
Yeah.
often say that although Kirkwood School District might be predominantly white, the world is not. And so we have a responsibility for those kids as well to ensure that we are preparing them to be global citizens. They leave our spaces and they go throughout the world. And that's going to be very diverse for them. And they need to have some experiences interacting with, having empathy and understanding with other people who don't necessarily look like them. And then that third lens is really looking at creating opportunities for enrichment for students. And so I talk about it's really easier to keep a student at grade level than be in this perpetual cycle of trying to catch them up. And then they begin to develop this schema or background knowledge and information about how they see themselves as learners. And they don't always see themselves as capable and confident because they're in this just cycle of remediation. And so those foundational skills, access to rich early childhood experiences, pre-K, making sure that students have equitable summer opportunities, all of these different things, making sure that they're in programming, whether it's STEAM related, advanced placement, gifted, opportunities to transition if they choose not to go to college, but to be able to have success not only in other careers, but also in life. And so just really looking at the whole child is really important here in Kirkwood, and specifically, I would say definitely for me as well.
Very good. Thank you, Shonda. And something I've always believed that in order to do this work, it has to be systemic. And what you articulated very well in Kirkwood, you all have thought through this, and it is important to have it from a micro level in the classroom to have that lens, but really you cannot move the needle unless it comes from the more macro lens of leadership coming from your board of directors, coming from central office, and the superintendent. So Sharonica, I'd like to bring you, into this conversation, being a district leader and really a champion around this work. How do you navigate this? What's the programming? What have you been doing that's been successful in your tenure in University City?
Well, I don't want to be redundant for the sake of time, so I would echo what my colleagues have all articulated. Very great ideas, concepts, approaches, beliefs. Ron Edmonds said in 1970, we can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need to do this. Whether we do it or not must fully and finally depend on how we feel about the fact that we have not done it so far. We know what we need to do to educate all children: Black, brown, purple, pink, polka dot, students with needs, students who have identity issues, students in crisis. The fact that we have not, as a system, as a state, as a region, is something we need to talk about. And the school system is situated in a larger context. We cannot insulate our school system from healthcare. We cannot insulate our school system from housing. We cannot insulate our school system from many of the systems of oppression that have plagued St. Louis. And if we want to talk about truly, equitably, intentionally meeting the needs of all learners, schools can't do it alone. We have to embrace this system and begin to knock down those systems that impede our progress. In UCity, we talk intentionally about it. And race is a factor. Race is something that we don't talk about enough as educators, as a state, as a city, as a region. When you talk about those metrics that Brittany just referenced, think about the life expectancy metrics. Someone living in a 63105 zip code has a 17-year longer life expectancy than someone living in 63103, which is where SLU is, Grand Avenue, Kossuth. Let me give you some landmarks if you're from next North St. Louis. Let's talk about that. Those are factors that impact a child's ability to come into a school and be a kid, come into a school and learn, and not fear hearing gunshots outside of their home. not worry about where they're going to get their next meal, not worry whether or not their parent has a livable wage, a job, so they can buy the basic necessities. Curriculum, books, those programs, they don't teach children. People do. And we have to understand the system that our teachers are navigating every single day. And I would be remiss if I did not talk about the impact of COVID-19 and how it has disproportionately impacted children of color and children in poverty. It's not an excuse. It is a fact that we have to address. Our children are brilliant. There is nothing wrong with our children. Absolutely nothing. The system is not supporting our children. So in U City, we partner outside. We bring in experts to help us do the work. We talk about the work being a combination of the head and heart. I would argue it's more of the heart first, then the head. Children want to know that you care about them first. And I saw in the chat about teachers of color, we too have a goal of attracting teachers of color. We too have a goal of making sure that our workforce represents the children that we serve. In U City, 87% of my children are Black. And we want to make sure that our workforce represents that. The reality is African Americans represent 2 to 3% of the workforce nationally. So we have to partner with our white educators, with our educators of color, and make sure that they have the capacity, the knowledge, the awareness, the information to bring culturally relevant, culturally responsive practices to their students. And that's by creating a sense of belonging. We have a strategic plan. We have 4 strategic priorities. We have pillars, Learning Reimagined. You can look at those on our website. That's information that you can look at. That vision will not come to life without the people. And that vision will not come to life without us understanding the situation and the system that this system is situated in. The context matters. And so we have to simultaneously work within a system, with educators, with leaders, with school folk, but we also have to work throughout that system around those supports that impact the children that we serve. I have them for 8 hours a day if I'm lucky. I also have to understand what happens when they leave me. And we have to do this with dignity. We have to do this with grace, and we have to do this with the utmost respect for their families, for their communities. We have to stop talking about people and doing things to the people and do more with the people that we are aiming to serve. So everything that everyone just said, but we have to understand this system, y'all. It's not just schools in isolation. We are a byproduct of this larger construct that is established to oppress certain groups. And historically, fact, not my opinion, historically, the entity and the group that has been the most oppressed in this country are Black people.
Thank you, Sharonica. And my head, I was a bobblehead, like, yes, yes, to everything that you were saying. And one of the things that I've always said as a former superintendent, that schools are a microcosm of the broader community. And we see what's happening in schools because it's a product of what's happening out in our communities. So Sharonica, I want to tap into your great mind yet again. So let's talk about the other side of this, because you talked about emphatically the importance of community partners, being cognizant of systems, how oppressive they are, especially to Black children. But now there's pushback to do this very thing that we need to do in order to help Black children. And it has exploded since COVID, since the pandemic, since coming back. And it's become, well, in my opinion, public school's always been a political football, but now it appears in some ways very organized around CRT, around the 1619 curriculum. You know, Sharonica, I want to know from your role and your perspective, especially from what you just shared and setting that groundwork, how are you navigating what you know is best and what you have set up to do what's best for the children that you serve? How are you navigating all of this for your students, for your families, and for your teachers?
So I'm going to be vulnerable. I don't have all the answers. And COVID-19 has really complicated our work. Didn't anticipate that, was not prepared. I didn't have a COVID-19 class and a training on how to navigate it. So I'm like a fish out of water, and we're doing the best that we can with our expertise and with partnering. Septima Clark, if you don't know who she is, look up. She really is the godmother of the civil rights movement in education. She said in 1956, the greatest evil in our country today is not racism, but ignorance. In our system, we fully embrace this work. We are fortunate in U City that our community is very supportive. Our community is very open. I am very much aware of what is happening in the state of Missouri, very much aware. We focus on fact. We have empowered our students to use our voice. Ian Feld is one of our students who wrote a powerful op-ed regarding his work with the 1619 Project, and he wrote his op-ed to Missouri legislators. This is about information. If we don't have information, if we don't have access to facts, and I know we can debate what is a fact because COVID still isn't real in some entities, and that's people's reality. But if we look at the metrics and look at the mortality rates, I would argue that it's very real. And so we are intentional about giving our students information so that they can digest, they can make inferences, they can apply, they can negotiate, they can challenge. And our students ripped the 1619 Project apart. We were bringing Nicole Hannah-Jones to U City with about 25 other high schools. We were hosting a session for her in April of 2020, and COVID happened. They didn't just take the 1619 Project and said, okay, this is it, this is the gospel. They challenged it, but that's what we would do with any piece of literature. So the fact that this piece of literature, that this concept of CRT, which is not being taught in University City, and I will argue it's not being taught in any school in Missouri, it is about ignorance. It is about fear, and it is about power. I am giving up something that has benefited me, and other folks are trying to get it. It is about that power structure. And so as we navigate those pieces, I am going to be true to who I serve. I'm going to be true to the children that show up every day in University City. And I'm going to be true to doing everything within my power to best meet their needs. And are we there? Absolutely not. We have a tremendous amount of work to do, but the intent is to keep them front and center. It is noise. I know that there is noise. And honestly, I don't choose to spend my energy focusing on that noise. I choose to think about the things that I directly can impact. And yeah, I let my students loose. If they want to write an op-ed, okay, write it. We'll see about getting it published. And guess what? It was published in the Post-Dispatch. That was the kid. So when we let children use their voice, they have very strong opinions. We isolate them too much from the learning progression. Bring them to the table. Allow them to speak for themselves. And then as the adults, support them, be open to what they have to say, because sometimes what they say is like, it's an ouch moment, but be ready to hear what they have to say. And I would go back to Septima's quote. This is not really about, it is a racial issue, but it is about ignorance. It is about people not being willing to embrace the reality of how we got here. When Black children wonder why they are living in environments or communities that look completely different than other environments and communities, when they wonder why there's a liquor store on every corner of their block and they don't see one liquor store in another community, when they wonder why their grandmother died at the age of 45 to heart disease, those are things that didn't just start. There's a reason for those things. And we have to educate our children so they don't see themselves as deficits. And we need to stop talking about them as deficits. We need to stop talking about them as the problem, because they're not it. They're navigating. They're some of the most brilliant and resilient human beings that I know. And this system, our systems are failing them. So we have to educate them so that they can be empowered, so they can rise above that system and know how to challenge and negotiate and disrupt that system.
Yes, absolutely. And the words that you said that resonated with me, ignorance, power, and fear at the root of these these times in this tumultuous conversation and discourse around CRT 1619 and DEI, now it's social emotional learning, is rooted in ignorance and the fear of losing power, all of this. And our children are wrapped up in the center of this. And you articulated that perfectly, powerfully, and beautifully. And I thank you, Sharonica, for sharing that. And so I want to pivot to Brittany. You were in the eye of the storm. and I've heard you speak about this, and I'm a fan now. And I reached out to her. I think you had stepped away at the time. By the time I reached out, and things were becoming noticeable to the rest of the world about what was happening in the Rockwood School District, and the courage and the brilliance that you just represent, embody, is just, I'm so inspired. So can you share with us what you were experiencing in terms of what Sharonica was talking about, and how this manifests itself because of fear and ignorance and loss of power? So what were some of your experiences in Rockwood?
Well, first I can say, Sharonica was talking and my heart was going like this. It was going like this because I was like, she knows. So I will say, I've had the tremendous blessing to be supported by so many educators across this region, across this country, and especially the Black women in education in the St. Louis region. And so I have a sincere thank you to everyone who calls me and texts me and emails me and calls me sometimes on days like they don't even know that it's been a bad day, and they just happen to pop up like Sharonica did a couple of weeks ago and give me and feed me this love. And so like, I'm so grateful for that, because I would be remiss to say that I have not experienced an extreme amount of racial trauma, that I am still not taking care of myself and trying to rebuild from what has happened to me. And at the same time, still trying to remain scrappy and do the things that I need to do because I believe in this work. So I want to call a thing a thing. I want to call what has happened is rooted in white supremacy. I want to say that I have been the victim of white rage. I want to say that I continue to be trolled and harassed online, even without a position within the traditional education system at this point. So I would say that it started in a really interesting place. It started with this book called Ron's Big Mission. And it's a book about Ron McNair. Ron McNair has a center in his honor, named in his honor in U City. He was a Black astronaut that died on the Challenger. He was making a transformational difference in the lives of all of us before he was even an astronaut. And so Ron's Big Mission is about his story of trying to check out a book at the library when he was 9 years old and being told that Black people couldn't check out books. And the librarian called the police on him. And the police came and they said, like, let this little boy check out this book. So during the stay-at-home order, the book was read for our read alouds. And it was somebody posted online that, yes, also graduate of HBCU, North Carolina A&T, and said that the book was a problem, that they needed to be monitoring what our kids are listening to and being exposed to. And someone sent me the screenshot of it like at night and said, hey, do you know anything about this? And I said, no, I don't. I said, but in the morning, I'll figure it out. Next morning, I got up and it had gone viral. Someone had taken it and posted it on Twitter. And then the media got involved and had questions like, well, why would any parent have a problem with this book? And I said, that's a wonderful question, because this book is about American hero. It's not a fairy tale. It's about a man who lived, who honored his country. And so like, why wouldn't we want this book to be in here? And it was very interesting because at the moment I thought it was a win. We had 19 elementary schools in Rockwood. I would say over 10 of them read the book out of read aloud, all on Zoom for the entire school to attend. And the voices, the naysayers got quiet for a minute. But what I really should have realized is that they were just revving up. Like that was just the start of it. So we did our first District 1 read. We had never done that, where we invite members of the communities, teachers, social workers, guidance counselors, parents, students to come read a book. And we chose Stamped, the Jason Reynolds young adult version of Stamped from the Beginning. And I think the parts that are really important to say is that I was asked the curriculum department picked this book. I was asked to partner with them as the director of educational equity and diversity. My two counterparts that were working on it with me was a white woman and a white man, the head librarian of the district, and also the head of social studies curriculum. And so we came up with a plan on how we were going to create this community event. And we said, of course, we're going to do it on Zoom. And I invited Dr. LeGarrette King, because he is an expert on anything K through 12 when it comes to Black history. And so every day I was asking people within the community to send me pictures of them with the book. And I would tweet them out and I would say, hey, join us. And I would put my counterparts on the tweets. They would retweet it. And then we got to about January, and suddenly all the backlash from us reading the book was on me. I had people trolling me. I had people calling my office, talking to my assistant, telling her that my work was ungodly and immoral, people saying that to me, people threatening to come and meet me at my place of employment if I did not call them back in a reasonable amount of time. And it continued to grow. And so by the time we got to the event, I decided that I wouldn't participate in it. Terry sat on the panel, our head of curriculum, Dr. King, and I just decided that I was becoming the scapegoat for what was happening, that I was the easiest person to attack as a Black woman, that I was doing the work that I was hired to do, yet everything was being questioned all the time. My credentials, my ability to do the work, just making up things that were on Twitter. And then when we got to March, Terry and I had received enough credible, what they felt were non-direct, but the direct enough threats that private security was put outside of our homes. And so then the question became was, if I wasn't going to choose me, who was going to choose me? Like, I have a great responsibility to the children, but I have a greater responsibility to myself. And I couldn't continue to do that work in the manner at that moment because it was becoming too toxic. It was physically making me sick. It was mentally wearing me out. It was draining me. It was reminding me as a social worker that racial trauma is real, that the effects of it are long lasting. And then I always talk about like my parents and my father crying when this happened. And, you know, my father's old enough to remember when he couldn't try on clothes in downtown Baltimore, where he was from. He's old enough to remember that when he visited his relatives in North Carolina, that he could not walk on the sidewalk when a white kid was passing by. And so the idea that I would continue to inflict racial trauma on my parents and on the people who care about me, I could not do that. You know, we talk about intergenerational trauma. We talk about post-traumatic slave, all that stuff. And I know that all those things, it alters your DNA. And so I know that my parents' experience has altered who I am. And I couldn't do anything that would put them more in harm than what they've already experienced in their life in a system that wasn't built for us. And so I decided that it was time for me to take a step back, that I would continue to do this work, but it would just look differently. And yeah. I think that's been about my story until the media got a hold of it, and then it's gone from there.
Yeah. I want to thank you. Thank you for your bravery, for stepping up and leaning in. And I know that just seems so trivial compared to what you have gone through. But as I said before, your voice and your story encourages others. And thank you, because you have a legacy now. And you do. And I know you are in a bigger space now, and you have more of a platform, and everything happens for a reason. But as you heard, we all heard. And I think that's why a lot of women of color in particular have reached out to you, Brittany. So thank you so much for sharing that. So there are some questions, because we're at that time of the segment that have been brought to me, and I'm looking at my phone because I want to stay engaged, but I have questions being sent to me on my phone. So one in particular, as it really relates to the way our conversation has flowed right now, is talking about self-care, because this work is, as you say, it's authentic. You have your why, your journey. This is very personal in your lens. And we all felt Sharonica's passion through a Zoom call. We all felt that, felt the heart. but how do you take care of yourself? You know, Brittany, you said you're not quite there yet. Because some of this, it is a part of who we are in our DNA, and it's generational. But when you're on the front lines and you're a leader in this work, how are you modeling how to take care of yourself, or just to take care of yourself and your families? So Shonda, can you lead us off with that?
Yes, so Brittany is a great friend of mine, love her dearly. And when that experience happened to her, even now, like when I speak about it, it literally brings tears to my eyes. I don't know if people know, but prior to working in Kirkwood, I'd actually worked at Rockwood at the district office for about 5 years, and she was my colleague and developed a friendship with her there. Prior to that, I worked in Hazelwood East High School, loved it, and then also Pattonville as a teacher. So I've had experiences in various different districts throughout St. Louis County. And one of the things that I have developed is just a community of people who support me and who I know love me. You can't, and there's no question about it. And so when I decided to transition to diversity, equity, inclusion, so many people reached out to me and said, I'm praying for you. Before this journey even started, before things happened with Brittany. And I knew that this work was going to be emotionally laborious work. Like I care passionately and deeply about it. And so I know because of that, and because of some of the fear and misunderstanding behind that work, like Sharonica said, loss of power, centering white supremacy, and people who just fear anything different, right? So I knew that those individuals would come from me as well. And they have. I mean, I have trolls. I have people who send me really disparaging messages on Twitter. I choose not to engage with some people because that's a part of my self-care. I'm a person who I'm all for dialogue and discussion, but I'm not going to debate with someone who I know that they've already kind of dug their heels in, and that they're not necessarily even listening for understanding, just to really validate their point. And so I really tried to guard my space and my self-care. I try to make sure that I'm surrounded by people who will help build me up and affirm me in those moments when I feel like I am, just overwhelmed. I give myself permission to take an out, but to get back in the race, right? Because this work is necessary. So although it is hard, it is necessary. So I can't quit. Brittany said, if not me, then whom? And I definitely believe that that's part of the purpose for why these individuals attack us, to eventually just like wear us down so the work will stop. And it cannot stop. Again, I do this work for so many different reasons, but I have faith that we will progress in the future to a better place of being in this country. So I try to make sure that I'm doing things, whether it's reading, exercising, just anything that fills my cup. And I encourage people to find out what works for you. If that's just like taking a mental health day and just having a woosah moment, you need to do that. Whatever works for you, you need to make sure that you are really prioritizing self, and that's not selfish. And I would say, as Audre Lorde says, it's the self-care is the greatest help me out panel. It's the greatest form of
resistance. Rest is the greatest form of resistance.
The greatest form. We have to make sure, thank you, Brittany, that we live to see another day in this work.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shonda. So Sharonica, I want to ask you, being a district leader and champion, how are you taking care of yourself?
Brittany, thank you. My heart always, and I'm also a product of Rockwood. I graduated from there. And so your story always sits with me, and I just want to continue to lift you up. Your courage, your strength, your brilliance. So just stand in it, stand in your brilliance. I know who you are and whose you are. I happen to be a Christian, so I know whose I am, but I know who I am. And so I too am attacked. I am a Black leader in a very white male dominant space. I know who I am. They can write about me. They can say things about me. I know who I am, and I'm very clear about it. And I don't need others to define it for me. And know whose you are, whether that be a spiritual being, your mama, your grandmama, your TT, whatever it is. So that keeps me grounded. And I don't have a social media presence. I'm on Twitter for work. I've never had a Facebook account. I know, I just never got with it. I'm an HR person, and I saw a lot of stuff on Facebook when it first came out. And I said, this is going to go away. And boy, was I wrong. But I don't have a presence. So I don't read things about myself. I don't, because there's always something. When you want to avoid criticism, say nothing, do nothing, be nothing. You're going to get criticism. So those things help me. And I have an incredible family who loves me and loves on me. And I have incredible colleagues who love me and love on me. And I tend to spend my energy there. So that is my self-care. And I have a bi-weekly massage and Massage Envy. And I love to shop. That's therapeutic. I love to eat.
We forgot one important thing. I just want to say, as the social worker, I believe in therapy. I'm in therapy. I'm a strong proponent of that. I think that it's very important. My mother always tells me, Dr. Heal Thyself. And so if you go around preaching all these things about self-care, that you have to invest in it, and mental health, because it is real. And so therapy, acupuncture, massages, yoga. I'm all about the things that are going to make my body feel good and make like the blood flow and the endorphins and all the things that are going to help get me through these moments. That's what I feel like I've really leaned on.
That's fantastic. I love that. It's very well-rounded. You know, we have things that are spiritual. We take care of the body. We go shopping. We have our families. That's fantastic. So to round us off, Jamie, you know, what are you doing to take care of yourself in the few minutes that we have before we close up?
Yeah, so I would say ditto to everything that was just said. It must have been a rough couple of weeks because I've been shopping so much. I'm like, I got to scale this back a little bit. But yeah, all those things. While I'm not like in formal therapy, a lot of my colleagues will joke because I end a lot of our just hallway conversations with like, thanks for the therapy session. I think it's important, and this echoes what all of you have said just about knowing those people that are in your life that you can talk about this to. My husband, my children, like I catch myself sometimes like doing some deep breathing, like when I'm hugging my girls, like that's what I feel like grounds me when I get kind of worked up about, you know, an email that I've received or negative reactions to some of the training that I'm doing. I think about what's important. I think, you know, one of the positive things maybe that came out of the initial stages of COVID was really quieting that noise and just looking at what's important in our lives. And I think that's so important. I can get wrapped up with, you know, thinking that I have to do everything and be almost a perfectionist and stuff. And I think that speaks to this work. It's not perfect, and it has to be a journey. You know, we can't know everything there is to know about everybody, but committing to this work in the efforts, you know, of creating environments that serve all of our students, I think is so important. So yes, all those things that you all said, it's hard. It's hard work right now, but I know I have a responsibility. And so that's why I'm on this journey.
Wow. This has been amazing. I want to thank you all again. All of you are very busy, but it just shows how committed you are to this work. I'm grateful for your voice, for your presence. St. Louis is going to be okay because we have strong women like you. Again, you are courageous, you are authentic, and you are trailblazing women. So thank you for sharing all of your stories with us. So it is now 9 o'clock on the dot. I want to thank everyone for coming today. And I'm so sorry, we have like so many questions. We got to one because the panelists has such depth to their responses. So I'm sorry to everyone, but I don't know. We'll have to have part 2, Wally.
Really, we need to invite you all back for like a 3-hour seminar type thing, because I think there were a lot of questions and a lot more to dig into. Thank you all so much for sharing your time, energy, and expertise this morning. And I am going to go ahead and wrap it up here. And Mike, you're sharing your screen. I'm not sure if you're intending to do that, but I'm going to wrap
I meant
things.
to do that, Wally.
All right, very
good
good.
for you, my friend.
Excellent. So the suggestion here from Mike is please go and fill out that post-session survey. It's very important for us to get that feedback. Thank you for that, Mike. I didn't realize what I was looking at there. So just a few closing comments. Again, I really couldn't thank you all enough for sharing your time and expertise this morning, and your energy and your passion and your whys. I think there was a lot here for folks to bring home. So thank you so much for that, and have a fantastic holiday season.
Thank you, Wally.
For all our
Thank you,
participants.
ladies.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. You were outstanding.
Thank you, guys. Great job.
Thank you all.